The state of Indiana spends $12 million a year on property leases, all while it has empty space in its own government center.
You may never set foot in any of these buildings, but it's your tax dollars that are paying the rent. Call 6 investigator Kara Kinney joins us now with the story. Kara.
Well, Todd, our investigation started by walking around state government buildings just to see if they're being used efficiently. After all, state government has shrunk significantly since Governor Daniels took office in 2005. To our surprise, we found empty space in the main government center, this while the state pays rent for pricey buildings. Monument Circle is one of the most desirable addresses in the state. Just steps away, you'll find the State Department of Health. Their rent, $2.3 million. And parking? Forget the meters. The state pays $464,000 a year for this parking garage for those health department workers.
Some might say that's expensive. Is it?
It is expensive.
Steve Harless is the real estate director for the Indiana Department of Administration.
It was a lease that was signed in 2004 before the current administration came on board. So the current administration kind of inherited it. It's a 10-year lease.
But we found other leases some might call pricey, like $975,000 annual rent for 151 West Ohio Street for the Department of Education, and $782,000 a year for the Department of Child Services to rent this building and parking garage on East Washington Street. In all, records show the state pays more than $12 million a year to rent buildings in Marion County.
That's as low as it's been in years.
But what about the 8,000 square feet of vacant space in the state's own government center? This spot in Government Center North was once occupied by the Department of Transportation, but it's been sitting empty for a year.
Some might say, if you have vacant space like this, why do you need to lease buildings?
You need to time it properly. So what we've done is cleared out the vacant space, and we have a couple of leases that are coming up shortly, and the objective is to move those leases into the vacant space.
But John Owens, a commercial real estate broker with Cassidy Turley, says many landlords are leery about signing with the state because the state now requires a provision that allows it to terminate the lease at any point for convenience.
And that's a broad term, one that is difficult to measure. It's out there as a risk, and it's a risk that some building owners are not willing to take.
The Indiana Department of Administration explains it put the cancellation for convenience clause in place in 2008 to protect taxpayers from unforeseen policy changes or budget cuts. That's several years after Governor Kernan's administration rented the high-rise space for the health department. Managing office space for almost all of state government is a juggling act, says Steve Harless, one often complicated by new laws passed by the state legislature and a shrinking state workforce. Harless also points out the state pays $4.7 million less for rent than it did in 2008. That's a 30% reduction in Marion County leases, which eliminates renting about 320,000 square feet of space. That's the equivalent of 11 stories of the city-county building.
Well, basically what it means is that instead of agencies spending money on office space, they're able to dedicate money toward their specific goals and specific programs.
State officials say they're always looking for ways to be more efficient, and that means you could see more offices moving away from the downtown and into the suburbs where the rent is cheaper and there's plenty of free parking. As for the vacant space in the government center, Harless points out it's less than 1% of the space in the entire government center campus.
Will this space be filled?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that expensive lease for the health department, it's up in less than 2 years.
We're in the process of going through some pretty significant and serious negotiations. Certainly, I think taxpayers, the last thing they want is to see money spent on office space when it can be spent in better ways.
Now, Kara, some people might think it's just an easy decision to pack up and move from one of these expensive leases.
Well, it's actually not easy. State officials also have to factor in the cost of moving, and sometimes it's more cost-effective for a department to stay put rather than move and lose those work hours. So there's a lot of factors to consider, and sometimes it's more advantageous for them to lease rather than to buy because there's so much overhead costs, like those maintenance costs. But if you would like to take a look at the entire list of leases, we've got that on our website, theindychannel.com.
All right, a lot of people want to check that out. Thank you, Kara.